אצלנו בגן יש המון ילדים, את חלקם אני אוהב, את חלקם אני לא מכיר, אבל מי לא שמע על האומץ של רן? הוא הכי מהיר בחול, הוא הכי חזק בגן, אבל יש לו סוד אחד שפחד הוא לגלות, שהוא כל כך מאוהב באחת הילדות. אז בלילות קרים עם פנס מתחת לשמיכה הם מדברים, והוא מגלה למה היא בשבילו כל עולמו מוגן מתחת לשמיכה. אצלנו בגן יש הרבה חבורות, יש כאלה נחשבים, יש כאלה שפחות, אבל מי לא שמע על קופצי הנדנדות? מרים להם כפיים, מלמדים אותם לנחות, מורמים על נס הדגל, גאוות כל האזור, רק לפעמים כשהם קופצים רחוק הם שוכחים לחזור. אז בלילות קרים עם פנס מתחת לשמיכה הם מדברים, והוא מגלה למה היא בשבילו כל עולמו מוגן מתחת לשמיכה. אצלנו בגן נפרדים בשמחה, כי היום לא ארוך ונפגשים שוב מחר, חוץ מאלה שפתאום לא חוזרים יותר לגן, אמרו לי שהם רק עברו דירה מעבר לענן. אז בלילות קרים עם פנס מתחת לשמיכה הם מדברים, והוא מגלה למה היא בשבילו, היא בוכה כשהוא מציע לה להיות כל עולמו בערב שלפני המלחמה. אצלנו בגדוד יש המון ילדים, את חלקם אני אוהב, את חלקם אני לא אכיר.
אני כעת במשעול ההווה, כילד ההולך לו לאיבוד, כפות ידיים מושטות מבקשות את העזרה, להמשיך איתך את המסע. ובצדדים הפרחים כאילו איבדו את זהותם, מחפשים עוד קרן אור שתעזור, עוד לגימה קטנה של מים ממעייני החוכמה, תביא להם את התקווה. ארים ראשי, אשא עיניי אל ההרים במרחקים, וקולי יישמע כזעקה, כתפילת האדם, וליבי יקרא, מאין יבוא עזרי. עובר אני כעת בנופים חדשים, הצעדים הם נעשים כה איטיים, מה יש שם שאין פה? שאל אותי עובר, מה בלב אתה שומר? קשיש העיר כשעל גבו מונח כל עברו, מביט סביב ומחפש את עולמו. כשההווה כל כך קשה לא אומר דבר, ארים ראשי אל המחר. ארים ראשי, אשא עיניי אל ההרים במרחקים, וקולי יישמע כזעקה, כתפילת האדם, וליבי יקרא, מאין יבוא עזרי.
Hello, everybody, and good evening. Thank you for joining. My name is Allegra Timsa. I am the board member for Unite for Israel. Thank you for joining us to commemorate the millions of lives tragically lost during the Nazi regime. Yom HaShoah, also known as the Holocaust Remembrance Day, is the day where we remember the 6 million Jews who were murdered during the Holocaust. The Nazis unapologetically pursued to ethnically cleanse the world by ridding it of Jews and other groups. And more than 80 years later, we will never forget. I would like to give a special thank you to the following organizations: Tanger Hillel at Brooklyn College, OUJLIC at Brooklyn College Hillel, Brooklyn College Student Government, Brooklyn College AEPI, United for Israel, and Project Witness for coordinating this event with our student committees. I would also like to thank our student committee: Mary Halabani, Samson Miller, Sarah Lee Cohn, Chaya Friedman, Eden Shweki, Shayna Weiss, Ellie Rhodes, Jojo Benaim, Yehudis Harmon, Farisha Saifi, Leah Branda, and Sophia Fromm. And a very special thank you to Aaron Gramo, President-elect of Student Government, on preparing the presentation for tonight. I would also like to thank Helen Wei from Project Witness for helping to facilitate this evening. We are very grateful that our speaker, Ruth Gruner, is volunteering her time to share her family story. If anyone has any questions for Ruth, please private message them to me or Samson Miller, and he will ask Mrs. Gruner the questions at the end of her presentation. Without further ado, please welcome Ruth Gruner, a Holocaust survivor with an impactful story.
Don't believe she's here. Is she supposed to be on her specific name, Allegra?
She was supposed to have joined with Helen. Is she not here?
Well, once I find her, I'm going to spotlight her. Samson, do you want to take over and let's do the moment silence?
Yes.
You have to unmute. I was muted. Okay, now Mrs. Turner can speak. You want to put her on the big screen?
I believe
Yeah,
she needs to turn on her camera in order for that to
Okay.
happen.
I don't understand. Let's see. What do I hit? There we go. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, you have to start again. There you go. Okay.
Yes.
Start
Well, you have heard about me. You know that I am a Holocaust survivor. So I'll be, I can't say happy, because speaking about the horrors that I went through are never happy. But I feel that it's very important for people to know what happened, because the witnesses are dying out. And so I'm trying my best to speak to as many people as I can, in order that horrors like that should never happen again. Because we are all God's children, where no matter what nationality, what religion, what skin color, we're all the same, we are people. And I think that maybe God helped me to survive, so that I can bring this message to my next generation, that is my children and my grandchildren, and then they will tell my story someday when they become parents, and so on. And the main thing that is most important for me is to really dwell on the fact that we are all the same people, and the world should be good for you. The world is beautiful. We have so much pleasure. And yet we women are afraid to leave the house in the evening. It's dangerous. we're being robbed, we are being attacked, killed. It should not be like this.
Tell your story. Start to tell your story. Tell your story.
My
Tell the
story?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So you will want to know how I survived. So you see, my city was entered by the Germans in 1941. The war began in 1939, but the Russian army pushed out the Germans and the Russians stayed with us for 2 years. Life with the Russians wasn't comfortable because they had different ways of treating. At least nobody was being killed and we did not have to go into a ghetto. The only thing that we had to do is they would measure, ask people how large their apartment was. And each person was assigned a certain amount of square feet. And we had a 3-room apartment, comfortable 3 rooms, and we were 3 people. I was an only child. And my parents had to take in another family to live with us. And the family had a couple with an 8-year-old boy and a grandmother. But nobody was killed. It was difficult to live like that. But then the Germans entered and they had already experienced how to kill the minorities because of doing it for 2 years before. So the first thing, we were not allowed to leave our homes in the afternoon, like when it got dark. We had to stay in. We had to put on, in my city, it was armbands. I heard from about other cities, people wore a yellow star. We wore cotton armbands. And one day my mother went out to town and she brought plastic armbands. And she said, look what somebody was selling. And this is very good. And I bought 3 for me, for your daddy, and for you, because this can be wiped clean. Because if the Nazi would see a dirty armband, was a good reason for him to take out a revolver and shoot that person. So that's how it started. And then the first deportation, we called it in Polish akcja, was in my city, was they only wanted to take away children. And I say take away because I once asked, Mommy, where is Aunt Claire? And my mother said she was taken away. So I said, but I didn't see her for a long time. Why doesn't she come? So my mother said, she was taken away to be killed. They killed her. From my city, nobody was taken into a concentration camp. Only in a small town nearby, they built a crematorium, and everybody who was taken away by the Nazis from my city was killed in that crematorium. And that's where I lost my whole family. And I was lucky to have survived with my parents. Now you would wonder how I survived. See, my parents had a chocolate shop and they made all the delicious things that were very popular with people. They made ice cream in the summer and besides all winter, marshmallows, cherries, chocolate covered cherries, all kinds of things. And they had a lot of customers. And one of the customers happened to be a wonderful Polish lady. Her name was Mrs. Szczygieł, Irena, that's Irene Szczygieł. And I have a photograph of her. Okay. She was a heavy smoker and she So she passed away when she was only 42 years old. But she is the first one who initiated my and my parents' rescue and surviving. So may I talk more? Do you have time? Okay. So she was like my mother told me, because I was very little and I don't remember, that she was a steady customer and became a very good friend of my parents. And when, after a while of Germans being in the city, a short time, the order came for Jewish people to move into the ghetto. A ghetto was part of a neighborhood, and a number of streets were surrounded by a fence, and there was a guard at the entrance to the area called ghetto. And they gave a Jewish people a time by which time we all had to be moving into that area. And my father and a next door neighbor went to look for a place where we could live in the ghetto before the deadline. And they came back and they said that they have good news. They found a room, one room. And my mother said, what? We are 7 people. We are 3 and the neighbors were 4. But my father said this was the best that we could do. We could not find anything bigger, and we are lucky that we found that one room. And finally, the day of moving into the ghetto came. My mother and father borrowed a wheelbarrow and put into it some essential things like clothing or dishes or pots, I don't know what. And I remember I asked Mommy, because I was a lover of dolls and I had a beautiful doll carriage. And I asked Mommy, can we take my doll carriage? And my mother said, of course not. There is no room in the room for a little carriage. And so we moved in. We slept on cots. We didn't have even a table. Just somebody talking?
No, go ahead.
No. And we had to sit, and there was an oven and a window in the room, and the bed, no bathroom. The toilet was in the, because the the ghetto in Lvov was on the outskirts of town. So the the place where our room was located was like a bungalow, like a little nothing. It was our room, and there was another room and a foyer. And the other room also held several people. And the outhouse toilet was in the backyard. And I remember Mr. Hood was his name, and he was the grandfather of the family that lived with us in the room. And there was no room to pass between the cots. And he was very, I guess my mother told me, and he woke up and started to complain and whimper and woke me up. And I asked Mommy, why is Mr. Hood talking? To whom is he talking? And my mother said, he is miserable because he has to go to the bathroom and he has to climb over all our beds to get out of the room to go to the door. But I remember in the ghetto, there moved a man into the backyard of the ghetto, like was of the little house that we lived in. And he put a hammock between 2 trees and he slept there. And my mother told me that she was a very respected, well-respected businessman before the war and a very nice person. And he was left alone because his whole family was taken and killed. And he liked me. So whenever I was passing by, he would call me over and he would tell me a fairy tale. And my mother would boil hot water in the morning and take it out to him. Of course, we had no tea or coffee or anything, just water. But at least it was warm because there we had this oven, and he didn't have that because he was outside alone. And then he would say to me, he would drink this hot water and he would say to me, little girl, you want to sit down here and I'll tell you stories. And then every day I would go out, greet him, and he would tell me fairy tales. And sometimes when I came in without my mother, came out rather, I saw him standing and with lifted arms like that, and he was praying to the one above. But I didn't know very much about dying yet because it was just the beginning of the ghetto and of the whole business of being killed. And one day I came out. I mean, my mother said she's going, it's time to boil hot water. I don't remember his name, no. And I followed her. And my mother went out of the room, went outside, and she turned around to me and she waved me back, go back, go back. And so I went back inside. And when she came back, I asked her, what happened? Why didn't you let me talk to Mr. whatever his name was? So my mother said, God took him away at night. God didn't want him to suffer beatings, torture, hunger, living on the outside alone. Winter was coming, or being taken into a concentration camp, or probably just being taken to be killed, like all of my family was. And my father had gotten a job on the outside of the ghetto. And he was walking every day to work. And in order to pass the guards, he had to have a sign. And you know what it said? It was all it said on the sign in German, but my parents translated it for me. In German, it said, nützlicher Jude. That meant useful Jew. Can you imagine we Jewish people are treated like animals? No name, no nothing. And when he had showed that pass, the door was opened and he could go outside where he was working in the town. And one day he came back from work and he told me and my mom that he ran while he was walking to his job. He met Mrs. Stigel in the street. And she approached him and asked him, well, she saw that he's alive. So she said, is your wife still alive? Is your child alive? And my father said, yes, they still are. So she said to him that she would like to save the life of his child, me. Next time, which would be the next day, when he goes to work, he should bring me with her to, bring me with him to the place where he worked, and she'll come and pick me up and take me into her home. So the next day, my father went to work. It was still early. It was winter and it was dark. So he was wearing a winter coat, a long coat. He put me under his coat and he told me to put my feet on top of his feet. And this is how we walked out, and the guards did not see me. We came to that place where he worked, and he told me, which I remember very well, that Mrs. Chigio will come and pick me up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I was hanging around, like my father came in to take a look what I was doing and walk back to work and so on. And finally, my father said, you know, Luncia, this was my Polish nickname that I named myself, because my name was on my birth certificate in Polish was Aurelia Czesława. It's Rachel Czesława in English. But I nicknamed myself this, so everybody called me that. And he said that it's 3 o'clock. Of course, I didn't know how to tell time and I didn't have a watch, but he did, he found out. And she didn't come. And he was probably became desperate, because walking me back into the ghetto, good chances were that I would be seen and killed on the spot together with him. So there was a young boy who worked, he was like an errand boy, and she lived not far from the factory where my father worked. So he asked this boy to go to her house and to that she is, that I am waiting for her and why she didn't come. It was way past 3 o'clock. So she told the boy to tell my father when the boy came back that she changed her mind about taking me. But since the boy told her that I was already on the outside of the ghetto and would most definitely be killed walking back in, she will come and pick me up the following day. And it was time for all the workers to leave the factory. My father took me to a room that had a desk. I don't know, must have been one day an office, but nobody was in that room. And he told me to lay down on the floor, and he went away. And he said that he hopes to see me in the morning. The lights were turned off. It was dark, totally dark. It was freezing. The steam, I guess, whatever they had, was turned off. And I was hungry because my father thought that Mrs. Chigio will take me to her house and feed me. But she didn't come, and he didn't bring anything for me. And I was scared. Besides having all those physical problems, I was very scared to be alone. So all I could do was cry. And I remember I started to cry until I fell asleep. And finally, my father came in the morning, and later on, Mrs. Chigio came and took me into her home. She had, by the time that it was when I was a few years old, I had just finished kindergarten. Her daughters were teenagers, and they were all working, and they said to me that they would continue their education when war is over. But I'm sure that they did not like the idea that her mother and the father agreed also to have me there, because if I would be found in their home, they would all be killed. But so they decided probably just to make believe that I'm not there, because they never talked to me. And I was sitting alone. Grandma, Mrs. Chigio's mother, she was a dear lady, wonderful. She was the one who would cook something in the kitchen and bring the food to me 3 times a day. Not much, because they didn't have enough either. But whatever she could, she brought to me. And she told me to sit in the darkest part of the room And it's in the winter, it gets dark very early, and she couldn't put on the light for me because they couldn't afford to use more electricity. Or if a neighbor would walk in and be in the kitchen, would notice a light in the back of the house, of the apartment, then they would say, why do you have the light on? And so I was sitting in the dark, very, very sad, missing my parents. And I had 2 handkerchiefs. And I decided maybe I'll cry. And crying helped me a little bit. So I was crying, first in one hanky, then into the other, and then got them all wet. So I put them under the bed to dry, and I was talking to myself. I said to myself, you cannot cry anymore because you won't be able to wipe your nose or your eyes. So you have to wait for the hankies to dry a little. And this was my life. And I started to, since nobody talked to me, Mrs. Chigil or mostly Grandma brought the little food, and Grandma washed me occasionally. And I could not use the bathroom because they shared the bathroom with their next door neighbors, and it was in the hallway of the apartment building. So I had to use a potty, and Grandma took care of that. I kept it under the bed. And I was I was used to be talking, and had nobody to talk to. So I talked to myself. And one day Mrs. Chigil came into the room and she said, what? You're talking to yourself? And I became embarrassed. And after that, I decided to talk to myself in my mind. And I started to tell myself fairy tales. All of the fairy tales that I could remember, because I had to pass the day somehow, even though it was cold. Even during the day, the apartment was cold because they couldn't afford to warm it properly. And one day, Grandma came into the room with this little food for me, and she looked at my hands and she said, oh my goodness, your hands are frostbitten. Let me look at your feet. And she looked at my feet. And she said, oh, and your feet too. And she asked me, don't you feel anything? And I said, yes, I feel pain in my hands, but I was afraid to bother you or to bother Mrs. Chigil. So I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to do. So Grandma helped me. She boiled potato peels in a big pan, and she brought the pan into the bedroom where I was sitting and made me put my feet into the pan and hands. And she repeated this treatment a few days, and she cured, and the frostbite went away, and she cured my hands that way. And one day, one of the girls went to sleep over at a friend's house and must have brought back lice. And I didn't know what a louse was or what it looked like, but I remember feeling terrible itching in my head. And I was scratching my head so much. And Grandma noticed and asked me, you're scratching your head, what is it? And I said, because I have itching. I don't know what it is. So she took me into the kitchen in front of a low table, spread out a newspaper, took a comb, and started to comb my hair. And I saw living creatures falling onto the newspaper. And she told me, these are lice. And Marisha, this girl who slept over at a friend's house, brought those lice, and she also had. And Grandma took care of the lice. She combed out, then she put some like an oil. I don't know what it was, but she knew, I guess, into my hair, and she tied a kerchief around my head. And in a few days, I stopped the itching. She, I guess, took away all those lice, and I didn't have any more lice. So that was another suffering that I had. And then one day, the youngest daughter, the Marisha, the one who brought home the lice, got sick. She had fever, and her parents told her to stay in bed, not to go out of the house. And so she agreed, she listened, she went into bed, back into the bed. And they didn't know what to do with me, because she said that she, before her parents told her, she had understood, she figured that she'll have to stay in bed. So she had a boyfriend someplace not too far, living not far from them. And she wanted him to visit her. And she said to her parents, and I heard it, and to grandma, oh, but I invited, I don't remember his name, and he's coming to visit me. What are we going to do with Luncha? So grandma said, we have to put her under the bed. And she pushed me way close to the wall and put a suitcase in front of me. And I was laying there between the wall and the suitcase. And they had a family, a little dog, a Chihuahua, and his name was Jackie. And he happened to be in the room. And he couldn't understand why I was laying there, I guess, because he tried to pull me out. In the meantime, the boyfriend came into the house and wanted to see his friend, Marisha. So he came into the bedroom and sat down on a chair next to the bed. And he probably couldn't understand why the dog is making so much noise under the bed. What's going on there? And he tried to look under. And I remember seeing the outline of his head. And then a miracle happened. Marisha got very scared because she didn't know if he would see me, that he would report the family to the Germans that they are hiding a Jewish child. He would get a monetary reward, and they would be killed. So Marisha said to him, hey, why don't you go to the window right now? I want to see, maybe it stopped raining and I feel a little better. Maybe tomorrow I'll be able to get up and go out of the house. So he got up immediately to the window. Mrs. Chigil opened the door to the bedroom at that moment, and the dog ran out. So my life was saved that day. And I could go on and on with many instances,
Okay. So
but that's enough.
for now, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So now I want to just tell you all, whoever listens to me, that I suffered so much just because I happened to be born Jewish. I wasn't any different from anybody else. All people are the same. We all have eyes, we all have hands and legs and a heart and hair. Unfortunately, I found out that people are discriminated against, people with darker skin. And this is all wrong. I thought it was terrible because I had never seen anybody darker than I was in Europe. And then I came to America, and my best friend said, went to work. I couldn't afford to go to college. I finished high school, but to college I had to go in the evening to Brooklyn College, and I had to work during the day. And since I love dolls, I had to work during summer vacation, also when I was in high school yet. So somebody recommended me to work in a doll factory. Can you imagine? And I dressed the dolls, or sometimes they asked me to paint the eyes of the dolls. And I saw I was working with people of all skin, different colors, and I thought it was beautiful. God created the world like, not if everything would be the same color, it would be boring. That's how we have colors of flowers, plants of different colors. So we can enjoy, put them together, and then we have animals, different. My dog happens to be, because at the end, when the war ended, Mrs. Chigil received a gift that her dog helped to create a baby dog. And this baby dog was given to Mrs. Chigil because his female had more than one. And Mrs. Chigil gave her to me. And Mrs. Chigil called her Lala. And Lala means in Polish a doll, but I kept the name. And that's how we called her. So anyway, I feel that in order for the world to be good for people and animals, we should understand and agree that we are all God's children, regardless of skin color, regardless of nationality, regardless of religion. We were all created by God. Every religion states that. And maybe God created different colors to make it beautiful, not boring. Should be interesting. Like I look sometimes at animals and I see that they're like a tiger, and on one side of the face and the other side of the face matches. The stripes are just so very beautiful. Or birds have color. I live across the street where a lot of birds gather, and they are gray, and the wings are black, and then the feet are black to match. And I admire, because God is an artist, and he was able to create animals so beautiful in different colors and matching them, and people. So why should we discriminate? Why shouldn't we thank God that we are entitled to live in such a beautiful world?
Now ask if there's any questions.
Now, do you have any questions?
All right, so I was sent several questions over the course of your speech. So the first question is, did you ever go to therapy? How did you deal with your life after the war? And did you ever question your religion?
No, I didn't question my religion. I just believed in God, and I prayed to him when I was in hiding. And I was okay. I didn't have to go for therapy. I did the best I could. And music helped me. I'm lucky that I learned how to play piano and accordion. And it was very helpful to me. When I came to America and I spent a whole day listening to this foreign language, which is English, and I was learning it, and the other students were really helping me. But when I came out back home and I lived with my aunt and uncle, they happened to have a piano, and I would sit down and play, and this was my therapy. I would play the songs that I remembered from my childhood and so on, until I got used to to my life, to my new life.
All right. A few people asked where you were originally from and if you ever went back to your birthplace.
Yes, I wanted to show my husband that was naturally, I was already married and had children. When I went, Jack and I, he has, his life is described in a book, Prisoner B3087, if you ever get a chance to read the book, because he was in 10 concentration camps. And I met him after the war, of course. So I decided I wanted to show him the apartment where my parents and I lived and where I was hidden for the first deportation that was for children. My parents hid me in the bathroom. My father took the door of the bathroom and covered the opening with a sliding door closet. And I crawled into through the closet, and that's how I survived. So my husband and I went to Lvov, we checked into a hotel, and we didn't know. I remember the Polish name of the street where we lived, but it's Ukraine now, and they changed the street names. So the taxi driver that we used suggested that I ask somebody who is elderly. They may remember the first name of the older name of the street. And so I noticed an elderly man. So I approached him and I said, would you know what the street was? It's Furmanova now. What was it? Oh, yes, he said. This was Bernstein, but we called it Bernsteiner Street. And he told the driver how to go there, and we went. And I showed the apartment to, I was afraid to say anything to the tenant. I knocked on the door or rang the doorbell, and a man opened the door, and I was afraid to tell him that I was a survivor. I didn't know, maybe he would want to kill me too, who knows, who knew what. So I said that I and my parents lived in that apartment, and I wanted to show it to my husband. Would he let us in? So he said, oh yes, by all means. He was very polite. And we went to the apartment, saw the apartment, and he had a little girl that seemed to be the age that I was when we lived there. So I gave her a few dollars as a souvenir, a present. And after that, I said to my husband, I have to get out of here. It's just too painful for me to stay in the city. And the next day we
And
left
which city was that?
Lvov. The Ukrainians or Russians call it Lviv. It's near the Ukraine, and the other couple that was hiding me and my parents, the Oyaks. Mr. Oyak was Polish, and Mrs. Oyak was Ukrainian.
Oh gosh.
But to me, religion is all like I keep repeating myself, we're all God's children. It doesn't matter if somebody names a place
Such
for
as
worship, a church or a mosque or a synagogue, it's all the same thing. It's all a place where we can pray and try to be good people. And people should be good to one another. That's the main thing. And that's why I'm talking and telling my story, because it's not easy to talk about it, to remind myself of all the horrors. But I do it because I want young people to remember to stay, not to hate anybody for no reason at all. No reason for different color or religion or nationality or country. Does not matter. And everybody should live in peace. And the world is so beautiful for all of us to enjoy. So everybody should be able to enjoy it together. Go on trips, visit each other, be friends, and not to discriminate, because it's horrible. And I had to go through that.
How old were you at this time?
I was kindergarten age.
Kindergarten. Okay.
I attended kindergarten.
Next question was, why did Mrs. Steigel change her mind?
Why she changed her mind?
Right.
When did they say she changed her mind? Oh, when she didn't come to pick me up?
I believe so.
Because she realized that if I would be found in her home, her mother, her husband, and she and her 3 daughters would all be killed. Because chances were, you know, that I could have been found. One time there was an incident that she misplaced when I was in her house, and she misplaced her keys. So she told me that she's going to knock on the door a certain way, and when I hear that certain knock, I should open the door. You can imagine? And I was a young child, I don't know. I hear a knock, and I open the door, and a man is in front of me. You can imagine? I thought I would just die on the spot. I got so scared. So I left him at the door, and I ran away from the front door, and I ran into the bedroom and closed the door. It was a stupid thing to do, but I was, you know, and he didn't know what happened. He never saw a child opening a door for him and running away. So he didn't go to look for me, only he went to a next door neighbor, and he said to her that he was giving it, it was a bill for something that he was handing out, electricity or something. Instead of mailing, I don't remember exactly what it was, but he had no personal knowledge of the family that lived there, just he had wanted to hand something to her. And so the neighbor said, oh, it's probably she has a niece. She told me that she has a niece, a little girl. So let's go to look for her. But he said, no, I have, and I was in the last bedroom in the door. If they would find me, I wouldn't know what to say. They would probably wonder who I am. And right away, people were suspicious, but people hiding Jewish people. So the neighbor said, you know what? Mrs. Chigil closed the door, and Mrs. Chigil will come back soon, and I'll tell her. Must have been her niece, because I know she has a niece. He closed the door, he went away, and the next day he came, and when Mrs. Chigil came home, the neighbor happened to hear footsteps on the staircase. So she opened her door, and she saw Mrs. Trigger coming back. So she said, you know, this mailman, or he was, I don't remember what, some kind of a city employee. And a little girl opened the door, and then she ran away. And he called her and wanted the girl, come back, and she wouldn't come out. So I told him this must have been her niece, and her niece is a little crazy probably, because it's not normal to run away and that sort of thing. So the next day he came to give her the bill, and he told her that he started to say that, oh yes, and she started to talk about it to him. And she said that you brought me a letter yesterday. He left the letter with the neighbor, but he wanted to see her, I guess. He was very curious why I acted so strange. Oh, now I remember better. That's why he came in. because she said to him, the letter was so, I got such wonderful news in this letter that you brought for me yesterday. You have to have a drink. And she had quite a bit of alcohol in the house. And she gave him so many drinks that he forgot about me, he forgot the whole story, and he went away without asking and questioning her because she got him drunk. And that was a miracle that she had knew what to do, and then she had the liquor in the house. So, so I stayed on, and then they had to paint the house, the apartment. And they were afraid for painters to see me. They would start asking, who is this, who is that? So Mr. Shigil said to me, the paint job will last 2 days. And you see, in Poland, every tenant had a cubicle in the basement, in the cellar, for storage, because not everybody had a refrigerator, whatever. So people, I remember my mother would buy a sack of potatoes that would last like for a winter, half a winter, and keep it in our cubicle in the cellar. So he said, when the paint, before the morning of the painters to come, before that, I will take you down. And the morning came, and he came into the bedroom where I was sitting, and he opened a, how do you call this fabric? A big sack, like people, there is a name for it, I forgot the material.
Burlap.
How?
Like burlap?
Burlap, I guess, a big sack. I mean, I fit into it.
Yes.
So he put me into the sack and put me on his shoulder because he was afraid for me to walk on the staircase in case a neighbor would see and ask him, hey, who is that? So he took me into the cellar and he said I should sit down on the floor. There was no furniture there or anything. And he will come to, when the painters leave, like 5, 6 o'clock, he will come and get me. And he left. And suddenly I heard noise and I started to look around and I saw little animals. And well, now I know it was mice and rats. But at that time, I never saw a mouse or a rat, so I didn't know what it was. But at first they were running, looking at me and running away, looking. And then they saw that I didn't do anything to them. So, and I sat down on the floor, the only place I had to sit. So they started to entertain me. That's how I spent my day, 2 days actually. I was watching them walking from one corner to the other. And there were holes in the wall and they were hiding, they were coming. They were not afraid of me. They treated me like if I wasn't there. So that's how I spent 2 days of the painting of the apartment.
All right. A lot of people want to know what happened to your parents and if you were ever reunited with them.
Yes. This was a question today that I wrote in a letter. What was the happiest hour of my life during the Holocaust? So I'll tell you what happened. My parents employed a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Oyak. They used to help with making the chocolates and baking cupcakes and so on. And when I was already at Mr. and Mrs. Chigil's home, hidden, as my father was walking to work, he saw on the street Mr. Oyak. And he approached him and he said to him that I am hidden by the Chigils, and they knew each other very well. And so how about he should take my mother, because he hopes that I will survive the war, and he would want me to have a mother when I survive. Mr. Oyak, please take my wife. And I didn't know the details of exact details how it was, but I was told that when my mother got into their apartment, Mrs. Oyak said to my father, you know, I would want your daughter should have also a mother. Let your wife come. And somehow, I don't know how my mother got out of the ghetto. Somehow I never asked her that. But because I got under my father's code, but she didn't work, so she didn't have an ID. Maybe she borrowed from somebody an ID. And she knew where they lived, and she went, and my parents survived with the Oyaks. And towards the end of the war, when the Shigels couldn't keep me any longer, they were too scared because the girls said, if I don't go, they will do something. I must leave the house. It's another long story to tell, but my parents survived. And when they took my parents, and one day, Mrs. Chigio said to me when she knew the girls insisted that I leave their home. They can't take it. This youngest one, this Marie, 17-year-old, she just wanted me to leave. So Mrs. Chigil told me that she's going to take me to visit my parents. She didn't tell me that she was hoping that I would be able to stay there, because she wouldn't tell me that. So she said to visit. Well, that was wonderful. What an idea. I didn't see my parents for 8 months. I was alone, hiding by the Stigels. And we got on a bus, and Mrs. Chigil whispered to me, came over, and she said that she thinks somebody is looking at me. We have to get off. So we got off the bus and we were walking, and she said, be careful, walk slowly because it's a long way. It's far to the Oyak's apartment. So it was July, and beautiful. I looked up and I saw the sky, because I wasn't allowed to go near a window in their apartment even. So I forgot what the sky looked like. And then I saw trees, and I saw grass around the trees, and I heard birds singing and flying. Oh my goodness. When Mrs. Oyak opened the door, when we got there, I said, like, to myself, I remember that too. Oh, the world is so beautiful. I would so much want to live. So Mrs. Oyak started to cry. And I didn't know why. I got scared. I thought I insulted her. I didn't know why she's crying. I didn't understand. But Mr. Oyak was standing next to her. He said, you know what? Let her stay with us. It's the same death, whether we're hiding 1 person, 2, or 3. So this was the happiest moment of my life, when I got there and I saw my parents. And when I heard him saying that I can stay. And I stayed more than 2 years with them.
All right, and we're gonna do just one last question, and that is, did you ever get the chance to visit a concentration camp after the Holocaust?
Yes, my husband and I took a trip to Poland. He wanted to show me the camp where he was. And this camp was Auschwitz. And Birkenau was walking distance from Auschwitz. So we went, and the city that he was taken from is called Krakow. It still keeps Poland, that part of Poland is still considered Poland. and they keep the same name. So he took me to see the apartment where he lived with his parents. And he told me when his parents were taken, he heard people walking and screaming and crying, and his parents were among those people. And then he found out that they were taken to probably Auschwitz. And my grandson found on the computer the date when my husband's father was killed, and not the date they put down died. They didn't put down killed, but not the date of Jack's, my husband's mother, because she was probably still alive on that day, and they were very careful the way they kept notes. So that's how. So she was probably, after a few days, she was probably killed too, or she didn't survive. So I never met Jack's parents. And so I visited this Auschwitz and Birkenau, and it was horrible.
All right.
And my husband told me how they slept, how many people in one bunk. You know, it's created for one person, and they stuffed in so many people to sleep together.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ruth, and thank you everyone for your questions. Now on Holocaust Remembrance Day, a 2-minute moment of silence is observed across Israel, accompanied by start to finish air raid sirens. So please join us as we partake in our own version of this gesture.
We will now be lighting 6 candles in honor of the 6 million Jews that perished during the Holocaust. I now invite Ruth Gruner to light the first candle.
Should I stand up?
No, you're good.
I can sit.
Yeah. Can everybody see her? There we go.
I now invite Samson Miller, treasurer of API and author of The Winds of Beyond, to light the second candle.
Light it, strike it. Okay.
I now invite Sarah Lee Cohen, president of the Hillel, will light the third candle. I now invite Yehudis Harman, executive assistant of the OUJLIC, to light the fourth candle. I now invite Leah Brander, member of the OUJLIC, to light the fifth candle. I now invite MJ Romano, United for Israel Club Connector, to light the sixth candle.
Don't believe she has her camera on.
And finally, I invite Samuel Gantharini, Vice President of Students Government, will light a seventh candle in honor of the Holocaust survivors who died this year from COVID-19.
No video. Do we have someone else who can replace him?
No, I don't think we do, but I guess we could just move on.
Let's move on.
So I now call on Andy L. Eben to say memorial prayer for the 6 million that perished.
Andy, you're muted.
I don't.
Can you see my screen?
Does anybody have the? Oh,
Can you see my screen, Andy?
Yeah, it's there now. Thank you. El Male Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Ashchina B'Ma'alot Kedoshim Utahorim Kezor Harakia Mazhirim Al Nishemot She Bavor Shenedvut Staka Ba'ad Zechot Nashmato Began Eden Tehe Menuchatam Lachain Bala Rachamim Yatsi Reim Beseder Knafav Lolamim V'Yitzror V'Tzorachayim Et Nishmatam Adonai Hu Nachlatam V'Ninuach V'Yanuchu Al Mishkavam B'Shalom V'Nomar Amen.
Thank you everyone for joining. Please stay for Hatikva and enjoy the candles.
נפש יהודי
הומייה
ולפתי מזרח קדימה
עין לציון צופיה עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו התקווה
Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you everyone for joining.